we're so focused on myofibrillar protein and our protein needs meeting that needs, but everything else is adapting alongside it. So our tendons need to get stronger. All the connective tissue in the belly of the muscle and the organ that is the muscle, our bones need to get stronger. Growth hormone helps with all those things. So it's going to help with stability with the entire musculoskeletal system. So that's beneficial. I think personally, my big theory with why people tend to grow better a lot of times in terms of muscle mass with growth hormone is that it staves off the body fat gains that they would otherwise get that might slow them down just because I'm getting too fat, or psychologically they don't want to, or simply that they can eat more and have more anabolic drive coming from the incoming food, but at the same time have a better P ratio, so more muscle mass relative to body fat.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Blood, Sweat, and Gear with Coaches Skip Hill, Andrew Berry, myself, Scott McNally, and we are joined by Scott Stevenson. What's up, Scott?
I'm here, baby. We're ready to go.
Hell yeah. Guys, all of our programming. I have no idea what we're talking
about. I have no itinerary, anything for today, but
that's
I don't think
good.
It matters. Is there such a thing for the show? Really?
All of our programming, guys, is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK for additional savings. They have high-quality, third-party tested supplements. They're a company that you can trust. They're a company that all four of us have trusted for literally over decades now. You can go to supplementsource.ca if you're in Canada, and you can get great deals on various products over there as well. So definitely check them out for our Canadians. And, of course, we're brought to you by Patreon. Skip, I'm letting you take the wheel here, man. It was your thought that we'd bring Scott on and that we'd basically just pick his brain, right? And I know you had some topic ideas.
Exactly. And the topic was difficult, to specifically come up with, because there are just random things that have, I say, popped into my head, over the last 6-8 months, but it's primarily because of, the questions that I'm asked by clients and stuff like that. And sometimes there are those questions, and it's funny because, trainers don't like to admit this. There might be something that I'm not sure of. Yeah. I don't know about this. So they just kind of positively and very arrogantly rattle off some that may or may not be true, and they may believe or they don't believe. So Scott is kind of the go-to guy on things like this. And I have brought a couple of these things.
Okay. I can do that better than anybody, is what you're saying?
No, everybody else does. And then at least at the very least, if you don't know it, you may say you don't know. And you're like, well,
for sure.
Almost like let's process this. Let's work through this. Let's hit it from all these angles. And one of the things that has stood out to me was Andrew and I got on a topic, or not a topic, but a discussion about IGF levels versus, well, here, I have it written here now, so I don't want to mess it up. It's IGF levels. Here's my question. IGF levels with split doses versus bolus doses, the effect or impact it'll have on IGF levels. But here's the hang up that I have.
Wait, you're talking about GH in bolus dosing versus
IGF-1 or
yes,
GH?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so I'm so excited and scattered and have a million things on my brain. Thanks for clarifying, because you're right. It's GH dosing based on the IGF levels, and there's just that bolus versus split dose. It's kind of is it? Is it an antiquated idea to think that the split dosing is so much better for lipolysis versus a bolus dose is it really going to matter? How much is it going to matter? And yeah, I could keep going and going. What are your thoughts on the split dose versus bolus dose of GH?
So the normal GH production is like maybe 2 IUs a day, something like that. That's endogenous production for, larger person. And let's say that you're going to do like 10 IUs on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're doing kind of the bolus thing. The idea being that would jack up your IGF-1 more so than smaller doses spread throughout. So that's 30 IUs over kind of 6 days, let's say, and instead you do 5 IUs a day. So you do like 1.5 or a little more than 1.5 IUs 3 times a day, spread it out. if you hit those 10 IUs, those are going to, that GH is going to be up and out in about 8 hours. So if you do that in the morning, it's, if you do it at 8 o'clock, it's pretty much by dinner time. You've got no lipolysis being driven by the GH. Now, if you take 1.5 IUs or so, and then you get yourself up to about 5 IUs a day, you're, 2.5 times endogenous production. So you're driving GH based lipolysis all day long if you're spreading those out every 8 hours roughly, or substantially. So that's kind of the pharmacokinetic idea of spreading the doses out for better lipolysis. And I remember back in the intense muscle days, we were talking about this, like it was probably 15 years ago, and trying to figure out like why it would work. And I didn't come up with the idea, but it was an idea that I had that I probably took from someone else. But that's kind of what I was thinking, is that the higher doses, because that's the thing. Unless you've got acromegaly, you've got a pituitary tumor, an adenoma in your pituitary, you've got giant GH output. 10 IUs is way above what you're going to get, at least over that prolonged 8-hour period. You can get pretty high spikes of GH, but they rise and they fall pretty rapidly. So maybe you're hacking the system with the big dose, and that would be something that would produce the elevated levels of IGF-1 more so than the same equivalent dose spread out over the same period of time, but in the microdosing, the smaller doses. So I don't know. The thing that's interesting, I'll let you interject, but Andrew and I were just talking about a situation where someone had just crazy IGF-1 response.
These guys know about it because.
Okay.
And let me backtrack just one sec, because when Skip started this segment, talking about like coaches like to pretend like they know everything and appear all knowing in front of their clients. And I just want to say, like, as a coach, been doing this for years, when I don't know something, I reach out to my friend groups. Like Scott, I reached out to you about this. I reached out to Scott and Skip about the GH question. Just see, hey, have you guys seen this before? Maybe you guys don't know, but have you seen something like this before? And I have other groups that, I'll rely on too. Like Chris Tuttle is a good friend of mine. We share ideas back and forth. And that's what I kind of think of it as, is sharing ideas, because we all have general knowledge about what we're talking about. Maybe not as specific as a very particular case, but maybe one of our colleagues has seen something and has picked something up along the way that does, fit that niche answer that we're looking for. Right. But to go back to what Scott Stevenson was just saying about, because I know this person wouldn't mind me talking about it. I'm not going to name him, but I had a client who I used to work with, and he came back after 1.5 years, and I don't recall his IGF ever being very high before, because it wasn't, because we did look back subsequently, but his IGF came back at 821, I believe it was, which for those who aren't very familiar, like that's off the charts, right? Like you're on really good
into the normal range.
Yeah, like you got some good growth if you're in the 4s, high 3s, 4s. If your IGF levels are sitting there, you're like, okay, I'm on some real good stuff. When you see 800, like my jaw dropped when I saw that, and I was like, this can't be real. But anyway, my plan for him, after talking to Scott Stevenson about this extensively, and we had 2-hour conversation between 2 different calls, looking at research papers and going over acromegaly cases, etc. We decided to pull his GH out and let's see what his IGF levels are naturally, because we needed to find out, hey, does he have a tumor, and is this something that he needs medical attention for, or does he just have some really good stuff, and is he a really good responder? And we got the results back yesterday or day before, and his natural results came back at like 273, 274. So the sigh of relief I felt in range. Yeah. Yep. So the sigh of relief I had of, okay, cool. Like I don't have a client that has a tumor that needs medical care, but also, dude, you got some really good stuff. Give me that source. Like that kind of a double whammy there. But anyway, I just wanted to interject the facts about it.
Yeah. So, but he's someone who, is, I would say definitely is a responder in terms of IGF production. And I would imagine, I could totally imagine there's situations where some people are more so responders in terms of lipolysis. It seems, and this is total anecdotal, that the people who, and you've probably seen this too, Ken, the people who, and all you guys probably have seen this, the people who respond really well to GH, they get all the good stuff, and they also will tend to get the facial feature changes and the nose, sort of the bulbous nose. Sometimes I've seen some peaked ears. Sometimes it happens. People get the cartilage changes. So that suggests to me at least that a lot of tissues, the adipose tissues, adipose is technically connective tissue, actually. So the connective tissues are responsive to the GH, sort of, in all kinds, all sorts, not just the adipose. But anyway, back to that, because there's a good question, and then I'll throw this last thing out here. It was kind of facetious question, but Chase Irons is like, "What about 18 IUs every day?"
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well then you're maxing out everything, right? But if you've got limited funds and limited GH, it does, just from a pharmacokinetic perspective, it makes sense to spread it out, because the levels will come back down in terms of GH and its effects on fat loss. But what I don't know is what a dose response would look like if, for instance, you took, a host of subjects in and gave them 2 IUs, 5 IUs, 10 IUs, 15 IUs you're not going to get much of an IGF response just from a single dose. But if you try those different kind of bolus-related protocols, the same dose over a period of time, less frequently higher amounts versus more frequently lower amounts, what would happen in terms of IGF-1? That was the guess, because a lot of people were finding that for whatever reason, they seemed to bulk better with the bolus doses. And maybe they just got more water retention, and that helped to some degree, or maybe it just shifted. There could be a bunch of psychological placebo-based effects there, but that's the part that I don't know, because you're not going to see researchers getting money to test those sorts of things with those super high doses of GH. So anyway, you had a couple of things, at least a few thoughts on your head, Skip.
Yeah, I always do. In fact, too many. So when you guys are able to speak longer, it allows my brain to filter through what's important and what isn't.
Okay. All right, good.
So I appreciate that. What I'm wondering is this, and it's something that, again, this is one of those things that we can't really, there is no science yet, or we're not to the point yet where we can say matter-of-factly and that a lot of these answers are black and white. I completely understand it. But for the sake of conversation, if the lipolysis, well, first, we can't really separate, and correct me if I'm wrong. If you guys feel differently, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm thinking out loud here, and this is why I wanted to do this segment, to just be able to kind of bounce things off each other. How do we separate, or can we? Because I don't think we can. The impact of lipolysis from GH use with the impact of gaining muscle or getting bigger. If we're responsive to GH and we have higher IGF levels that are super physiological, they're higher than we need, and we're a good responder for that reason, from a hormone standpoint, from an IGF standpoint, then I don't see the dosing. It's either effective with your dosing or it's not effective with your dosing. Versus, and I think you gave a great answer for bolus versus more split dosing. Logically, that makes sense. I like things that are logical and sensible, and it makes sense. But yet, I could still see on the other side the bolus. What I couldn't latch onto was this. And I'll admit it, I'm just going to be completely transparent, and this always feeds the trolls, so they love me when I do this. But I didn't know that IGF levels don't fluctuate very much. I didn't think that they radically fluctuated, but that they didn't really fluctuate. And the reason is I'm trying to attach that bolus versus the split dose with the fact that the IGF levels don't. It's something that we talked about, Scott, a while back, like years ago, Intense Muscle Days, where changing the dose of GH to intramuscular versus SubQ would spike IGF levels higher but shorter. So my brain latched onto that, and I'm like, well, there is that difference. There can be those differences. But I think what my brain latched onto was they aren't as dramatic. They're subtle change. Take the wheel. I mean, is any of what I'm saying make any sense? Okay.
Well, one thing I don't know, the pharmacokinetics, so the half-life and the profile you get for growth hormone, it doesn't vary. It varies a little bit depending on the formulation, but it doesn't vary much whether it's IM or SubQ. as far as I know. That's different for insulin. Insulin's a different story. But I haven't also seen what happens if you inject into an active muscle, right, and then go train. So that would change it, I'm guessing, but I haven't seen that studied.
Okay, you're talking about insulin, right? When you're asking
insulin, that's the case. But with growth hormone, I think you mentioned comparing SubQ versus IM on growth hormone, right. and I don't think the profile changes, the pharmacokinetic profile, that how fast it comes up and how fast it comes down with regards to GH.
Well, I don't want you to move away yet. I have one more thing on this topic. Is that okay, Scott?
No.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, let me finish my thought. I've got some more on this. So the interesting thing is that we have to remember. Sorry, I was looking something up here. I'm gonna get back to you guys. So growth hormone has roles during growth and development, where it's stimulating. People talk about growth hormone hyperplasia and all this kind of stuff. It's doing those sorts of things in developing muscle. Whether it has a role in hyperplasia in the context of someone producing more muscle cells who is an adult human, that sort of thing can happen. It's been demonstrated in animal models. Whether someone's on super physiological growth hormone, if that would tend to cause that to happen, I don't know. But growth hormone for a growing individual, this is why they give them to dwarfs who don't have enough growth hormone. It has growth effects, and some of those are mediated by IGF-1, and that's why that's been studied in that context. But growth hormone for adult, you don't see bodybuilders say, "Oh my God, that guy's obviously abusing growth hormone. He's 9 feet tall," right? People aren't getting any taller, or their bones aren't growing. They're getting the cartilage effects. So we've got different roles of those hormones as adults, so to speak. So growth hormone then, like, produced during exercise. I remember there was once, I won't say who it is, but someone was claiming, like, don't eat any food after your exercise so you don't miss out on that growth hormone spike that you get, right? Because you can go hypoglycemic, that'll cause a growth hormone spike. You go to sleep, that'll cause a growth hormone spike, blah, blah, blah. So the IGF-1, what we're kind of doing with this when you're taking someone, this is why I had that suspicion that the bolus doses might be better for producing IGF-1, is because growth hormone usually doesn't get very high. But if there's some threshold for growth hormone, and you're more likely to get that with prolonged elevation that comes from an injection, that might be more something that's beyond that threshold for triggering more IGF-1 production in the liver. And actually, there's IGF-1 production that's being produced locally in, for instance, muscle cells and bone cells too. So it's a whole other story. I've got like an hour and a half.
Hey, good, because that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah. Okay. So we can talk about all that. So, but we're using growth hormone as bodybuilders, and we're going above just a couple IUs a day in a super physiological context. And I think the further we go super physiological, the more likely we're going to be able to then exploit that. It's called the somatomedin hypothesis. Growth hormone stimulates IGF-1, and then IGF-1 would do most of the work of growth hormone. We know that's not really true. It's not that direct hormonal axis. There's growth hormone acting directly, and growth hormone triggering IGF-1 production locally, and then the IGF-1 from the liver doing its deal. So it's much more complicated. But we're kind of going outside of the normal physiology of an adult human when you're putting in 10 IUs of growth hormone a day, for instance. And we have that mechanism to produce IGF-1 that was important, is definitely important during growth and development when we're in infanthood and youth, et cetera, before we become fully formed, so to speak, as adults, and we growth plates have fused and all that kind of jazz. So the other thing with growth hormone too, or IGF-1, it's kind of interesting. Like in just the normal state, you can bring that down. You can. I thought you were going to ask, can we uncouple IGF-1 from growth hormone? And yeah, you can. You can have a situation where someone's dieted down. And this is what you probably remember this, Ken. Maybe you guys do, Scott and Andrew. If you wanted to get a growth hormone prescription, you diet yourself down into oblivion, and your IGF-1 will drop. And that is the surrogate for low GH. And then you could get a GH prescription, because obviously if your IGF-1 is low, then you don't have the growth hormone. But your IGF-1 will go low if you're hypogonadal, or if you're hypocaloric, so to speak, if you're not eating enough food, if you're starving yourself. So you could have someone who's, and this is a potential possibility when people do the 10 IU, standardized, see if my growth hormone is, or just start, not that test, when they take their IGF-1 levels before a diet and then 8 weeks into a dastardly diet and they start taking their GH at the same time, it's like, well, the GH raises your IGF-1, it would, but you're dieting so hard that your IGF-1 will go down. And if those, depends on how much gear that person's on, but there's so much variability there that the elevation of IGF-1 from the growth hormone could be offset by the diet, depending on their responsiveness to the androgens in terms of IGF-1. And that's kind of a black box too.
Yeah, and so that would have to be pretty dramatic, though, right? I mean, from a caloric standpoint, to really offer, I don't, and correct me if you disagree or if I'm wrong, but if someone is really calorically restricted for a while, then that would probably impact or might offset someone taking, let's say this as an example. And I understand that there's a ton of variables here, but just to kind of put a situation with my question here. Let's say we have someone who's at 4 IU of GH, and they're coming back with pretty normal IGF levels, like to the point where, and Andrew knows where I'm going with this, to the point where we're going, I wonder if this is real. This is probably not good GH. And I would think the same thing. Yet the GH serum gets tested after, say, 10 IUs or a bottle, and it comes out that it's good. So the diet, though, that it would take, or the caloric intake versus, output, obviously it would matter too, but it can't really, it would take a lot for the diet to offset that. So then you get into the people who are essentially. I know
personally, I'll just say this. I know personally that with no exogenous androgens and no exogenous GH, I've come below normal IGF-1 range on a blood work.
But how radical is that diet? Like, are you lean?
I was like 7%, probably 7 or 8%.
Okay, all right.
For a period of time. I was just holding that for a while. I took about a couple year break when I was in acupuncture school.
Okay, now that was without GH though, right?
No, that was like no GH. So just the being dieted down and being in a dieted, I felt okay. It wasn't like, oh my God, all I'm thinking about is eating, and I was okay holding that, but I was below. You can diet yourself below normal range. Getting below
and that I can get. But then if you put growth hormone in, or even if you're on TRT and not a big cycle, to end up with those average, very middle of the road IGF levels, then it becomes a question of the GH, but then the GH comes back that it tests well from a serum standpoint. So then we have what is essentially what we want to call someone who doesn't respond very well. But here, which leads me into my next question. Okay. Is it possible that, or maybe it is possible, and I'm sitting over here asking it the wrong way, but is it possible that the benefits that we get from growth hormone, the myriad of benefits, is not only related to IGF levels or IGF production itself? Is there anything outside of the IGF level that is beneficial from the use of growth hormone?
Like the direct actions of growth hormone?
Sure. Okay. That's right. And that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. So what are those? I mean, clearly this is probably a giant arena for you, but if you just had to throw a few things out, like what are those benefits, and kind of encapsulate that or tie it up in a smaller, the suite at the arena instead of the arena.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. There, like the growth hormone studies with humans don't show an effect on muscle growth. There's a rat study that I pulled up where they had, in that case they're deficient in IGF-1. I take that back. That was a different study. But if you're deficient in growth hormone, or you're doing high growth hormone levels, it doesn't seem to help with muscle growth per se, but it increases connective tissue, collagen protein production more so than what you see in myofibrillar protein. So it's going to help. That's the thing. We're so focused on myofibrillar protein and our protein needs meeting that needs, but everything else is adapting alongside it. So our tendons need to get stronger. All the connective tissue in the belly of the muscle and the organ that is the muscle, our bones need to get stronger. Growth hormone helps with all those things. So it's going to help with stability with the entire musculoskeletal system. So that's beneficial. I think personally, my big theory with why people tend to grow better a lot of times in terms of muscle mass with growth hormone is that it staves off the body fat gains that they would otherwise get that might slow them down just because I'm getting too fat, or psychologically they don't want to, or simply that they can eat more and have more anabolic drive coming from the incoming food, but at the same time have a better P ratio, so more muscle mass relative to body fat, and they can keep pushing that up. So let's say they're okay and adding their P ratio is like 1/3 fat and 2/3 muscle. Let's say it's half and half. That's not bad, really. Pound of muscle for every pound of fat. And you can change it to 2 pounds of muscle and one pound of fat, which is dramatically different, right? They're still gaining some body fat, but what's happening when you grow, when you put on 30 pounds and 20 of it's muscle versus 30 pounds and 15 of it is muscle, but 15 of it's fat. So 20 versus 10, 15 versus 15. That's a big difference in how you look, and you're willing to keep going. And it all in all, that makes a huge difference. So if you could, I mean, imagine you had a supplement. Let's just take this sort of hypothetically for growth hormone that doesn't do jack diddly for muscle mass per se. It's not anabolic in terms of muscle mass whatsoever, but it prevented all fat gain, and it wasn't catabolic in some way. And growth hormone's catabolic to fat, but it's not. I don't think it's catabolic to muscle tissue. Right. And you could just eat and eat and eat, and you just couldn't get fat, which is what kind of happens to some people when they are responders and they go on 15 IUs of farm grade GH. That just lets the sky's the limit, man, because you got nothing holding you back. And I think sometimes you get bigger, and when guys put on more body fat, they put on more water, they can't train as hard, you reach that sort of limitation. When you get too big, it's okay, now I've just gotten too sloppy. I can't train the way I need to try to push things, so I have to come back down. Yeah. Assuming the growth hormone isn't causing water retention, contributing to that kind of an issue. Yeah, if you've got something that prevents the fat gain and then gives you that fullness and roundness that comes with the water retention of growth hormone, that's gold, man. That's a placebo. It's like, look at me. I put this in, and 2 weeks later, like, I've metamorphosized, which is the story that I've heard 1,000 times. Oh shit! Then you're ready to go. Like you want to go. And then you line everything up. A lot of us are like, yeah, I do everything perfect all the time, but it makes it a hell of a lot more fun when you're seeing it, when you're seeing this magical transformation. So that's what I've sort of thought, that growth hormone is helpful to, it's not hurting, it's helping with the connective tissue, the supportive structures, the musculoskeletal system. It's not hurting in muscle cell growth. It may be having some impact on satellite cells as well, because it does, like I mentioned before, it does induce local IGF-1 production, which is one of the things that triggers the satellite cells into movement, and those are necessary just for getting bigger muscle cells. So I haven't seen, I think the highest was like 7 or 8 IUs, and that may have been in older men. But there's so much variation too. There's responders and non-responders in pretty much every study. So it's helping everything else, and it's preventing the fat, and that's a golden combination, even if it's not tremendously anabolic like testosterone would be or steroids would be.
Let me ask you this. Can you define – go ahead, Andrew, because I've been asking a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Well, because I think this one might be interesting in terms of growth factors, because I remember reading studies about growth hormone exerting effects on MGF and other growth factors, and having which have a positive effect on myofibrillar protein accumulation. I think there's like a study in 2003 that I read that was like kind of like the big one, and I was just trying to like scan through. You're probably like me. I have bookmarks of like thousands of studies, and being an idiot, I don't organize them very well. One of the labels just like GH, right? Well, that's not very specific, because I got about 200 GH studies in there,
right?
But But yeah, can you speak on that? And because I remember walking away being like, okay, so this is actually one of the direct ways that it does stimulate growth inadvertently, I guess, directly but inadvertently through MGF. So
when you're looking at those studies, and for people who are listening, I use EndNote to organize all my references. I have like 12,000 or something like that in there. It helps it really, really nicely. I've got folders and folders and folders, and you can move them from folders and reorganize really easily. But here's I think sort of the issue that a lot of people have had when they're looking at the studies. If you're looking at growth hormone during development, it's helpful with the development of muscles and muscle mass, right? So it's going to have effects on those growth factors. The question that is a little bit different is what impact is going to have on those growth factors in the context of resistance training as turning on muscle growth, hyperplasia, hypertrophy. So the animal research is really kind of bizarre. Like I just mentioned, there's a study where they did ladder climbing with rodents. So they have them climb up a ladder, kind of like doing, sort of lunges, and they put a backpack on them, and they get pretty good muscle growth in the calf. And these animals were they had only 20% of normal IGF-1. It didn't make a difference. It had no effect. The most extreme animal model, aside from the quail studies where they hang the weight, is the compensatory hypertrophy model, which I talk about ad nauseum all the time on my podcast with Scott. And that's where they study the calf, and they'll take out the soleus, or they'll take out the plantaris, or the gastrocnemius, and they'll leave the rest of the muscles in, one or two of the three triceps. Some humans have a plantaris. That's the hidden calf muscle that people don't talk about. It's between the soleus and the gastroc. Some people have one. Some people have two. It's either bigger or smaller. Anyway, it's bigger in rats. So they can do studies. They'll take, let's say they take the soleus and the plantaris out, and all you have is the gastroc. And the animal will limp around for a while, and then it walks normally, and that thing will grow like crazy. It'll grow to be 50, 100% bigger than it was previously. It compensates. It's compensatory hypertrophy. And you're like, okay, shit, that's pretty cool. So then they've done studies so what's contributing that? What is necessary? What's driving that? And they've done studies where they castrate the animals, so there's no testosterone. It doesn't make a difference. It grows just the same. And then they do studies where they give the rodents streptozotocin, and it poisons the pancreas, and they have no insulin, right? Doesn't make a difference. They grow the same. And then they take out the thyroid hormone, and doesn't make a difference. They grow the same. And they'll just take out the entire pituitary. So they got no testosterone. They got no thyroid. They got no growth hormone. They got zilch, and it grows the same. So that points to the idea that tension is the most important thing. So it's hard to look at the animal studies and say, we see that growth hormone does this in terms of these growth factors, in terms of growing muscle. And you've got these studies where they remove IGF-1, or they have a model where factors are missing, you still get growth. So there's so many redundancies. It's hard to say what's absolutely necessary. What I think kind of what we're doing with human bodybuilders is you've got all these switches, all these levers you can press that turn on muscle growth, right? And they do help. And then animal model, when you move those things, that's just a tremendous model of muscle growth. That's the type of tension, you can't get people to do. No one's going to volunteer to, hey, take my gastroc. Let's see how big my soleus grows. And I can do that shit. But if you just have all these switches and if you turn them all on, you turn on growth hormone, you turn on IGF-1. Vigorous Steve was on. You guys talked about his IGF-1 experiment. It worked like crazy, right? So those things can be additive depending on the person. And the thing is that those are all pretty much this is the crazy thing about androgens, really, is that average males producing 10 milligrams of testosterone a day, right? True TRT would be 100 milligrams a week. So 70 milligrams of testosterone in your 100 milligram of testosterone sip. And then maybe 200 gets you roughly in range. So you think, if we think about the body working around these hormones, if they're that vital, right, in some homeostatic fashion, you go way above that, you got, a little bit above that, and the body's going to try to re-regulate things. And it does do that, of course. And if you go below that, you try to re-regulate things. But the system, for whatever reason, can be hacked. Thank God, because this is what we want to do as bodybuilders. And you get more when you go to 500 milligrams, which is 5 times production. The system isn't meant to regulate around that. It's like a loophole in the system that we're hacking. And then when you go from 500 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams, you get even more. And that's 10 times what the system would normally be used to working with. It's way outside physiological range. So, and then when you take growth hormone and you put it in at 10 IUs, 5 times, it's what you're doing is we're hacking those systems so that its importance in the normal physiological scenario of a natural person trying to make muscle gains isn't really so relevant, because we're pushing the system so far outside of the normal physiological range, and just making use of the fact that it doesn't have some sort of way to block that excess stimulation, because in most cases in animals that had like a tumor like that, they would never reproduce. Evolution would have weeded them out. So you wouldn't have, there wasn't like a tribe of giants with acromegaly who had diabetes and all their issues, because, I don't know if they have fertility problems, but they don't live very long at all. So super elevations of growth hormone, super elevations of IGF-1, you're looking at probably cancer issues. Like all these things we're hacking as bodybuilders are things that would never have evolved, and they haven't, because we regulate around much lower levels of all those hormones that we're exploiting now. So anyway, to answer your question, it's kind of hard to know. Yeah, definitely growth hormone turns on growth factor production, IGF-1, MGF, those sorts of things. I have a figure in that that talk that I did for John's site a few months back now. And you would think, yeah, it does this, that, and the other. But then when you test it, at the smaller amounts, you don't see this magnificent effect. And some people use growth hormone, at least on muscle growth. So that's why I think growth hormone is helping more with fat, staving the fat off, and allowing people to push the other levers, push the food, push the training, and not get fat. And that's definitely a win. So that was a long dive. Did I answer your question, kind of, Andrew? Was getting at?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Skip, cool. Did you have another topic? I know you had kind of a few of them lined up.
Yeah, I had like I said, the questions turn into topics.
Yeah. Hey, what's up, guys? I have a lot of people who reach out to me on a regular basis who are trying to more effectively reach their goals. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is that they're not getting enough protein. And there's only so much chicken breast we can eat through the day, but we can easily add a high-quality protein supplement to boost those numbers up. True Nutrition has just about every protein powder you can think of, from high-quality whey isolate. If you don't tolerate lactose, then you could use their beef isolate, or you could use their pea protein isolate if you don't eat animal products. They literally have everything you could think of. I've believed in them for like a decade before they advertised with us. And they never went out of their way to say like, hey, we want to promote our stuff through you. I literally asked them because it's a company that I believe in. And at the end of the day, I want to see you guys reach your goals as effectively as possible. So if you use our code THINK at True Nutrition, you'll get some savings, you'll help to support our programming, and you'll get some high quality products to more effectively reach your goals faster.
I had one that, and this wasn't even specifically for Scott, but I like the concept of this because it's something that I do my best thinking when I'm driving or taking a shit. I don't know how you guys work, but that's when my brain processes things the best. It's something that came up to me. It was funny because a question, it's typically triggered by something that a client will ask me, right? So we had just been talking about or arguing, if you will, about the topic was like fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. So I'm kind of switching, gears a little bit and going from, gear, GH and everything to the training component. But it was something that I just occurred to me, and I thought, oh. So you have fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. I think we can all agree on that.
Not really, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, and this may be a segue for you where you go, oh, that's what, okay, so fast twitch, slow twitch muscle fibers, it's kind of an accepted, arguably antiquated way to look at it. But then I started thinking, the different ways to train different, the more explosive for fast twitch and, the longer duration. We've made the analogy of, the marathon runner versus a sprinter. But how do you explain and how does that hold up when the vast majority of growth is from the negative portion of a rep? So the fast twitch, in my brain, the fast twitch, slow twitch argument is essentially concentric, the positive portion. So if all that growth is in the negative, I say all of it, but the vast majority of it, then how does that even meld, or how does that relate to fast and slow twitch muscle fibers? It's just while I'm driving, or a thought that I had that I kind of came together and really couldn't. I'm like, I don't know if I can, like, how do I answer this? How does this come together?
So the fast twitch, slow twitch, that's the, people still use that term. It's really fine. You can do this in humans, but people aren't really measuring twitch velocity, that sort of thing in people so much. Do you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. My computer's kind of freezing a little bit over here. So you've got different ways you can type the fibers. People use type 1, type 2s, and then the 2A. The 2s are broken down to 2As and 2Xs, and that's based on myosin. You can type them in various other ways too. So what basically rules the roost there in terms of when those get used is this Henneman size principle. So for lighter loads, easier things, you use the type 1s first, and fibers are located in motor units. So in like your eyeball, you might have like 8 fibers per neuron. So a neuron and the fibers innervates as a motor unit. So because you got to be able to move your eyes little itty bitty bits, you don't need a whole bunch of fibers. And like in your quad, it might be hundreds and hundreds of fibers connected to a particular neuron. So when you start off a set, let's say it's a relatively light load, you're going to probably use a lot of type 1 motor units. So all the fibers of a motor unit are the same fiber type. There's a neurotrophic effect, so the nerve really kind of dictates what the fiber type is. And those guys are they have the same work history. They all do the same thing. When the nerve sends the signal, they all go at once. It's all one principle. So you start off your set, and we'll just talk about throughout the set, and we'll break up in the concentric and eccentric. And you're going to use type 1s and some type 2As, some lower threshold. This is the other way to categorize the lower threshold motor units and higher threshold motor units. So as things get more difficult, as the set ensues and the fatigue increases, your nervous system will do a few things. It'll start turning off some of those motor units and turning on other ones. It'll go to the higher thresholds, which will tend to be more so type 2s, and eventually the type 2Xs, which are the highest threshold or associated with the highest threshold motor units. But it's going to rotate through all those. So I like to explain this. It's like, imagine like this side of the room, we got 4 clusters of people. You're the type 1s, and this side's the type 2s. And we start off and we're using, a lot of the type 1s. You guys are all going, and then things get harder. I got to call some type 2s in. But then some type 1s will turn off and rest for a second. The type 2s will take up the load. So there's this magical rotation amongst them all. And the nervous system is also changing the firing rate as the muscle fatigues. It's called this muscle wisdom thing. So it's not overly stimulating at a higher frequency than necessary, so you don't get the nerve to fatigue unnecessarily. And then you've got concentric, eccentric. And this is the interesting thing. So when you do your concentric, you need to use more fibers, more motor units, because you produce less force on a concentric than an eccentric. So you lift up, it's harder, you use more motor units, and then when you come back down, it's easier. You have to use less motor units because the force that you get per motor unit is higher. So if you left the same motor units on, you lift up, it would just stay there. You have to turn some of them off in order to lower the weight. But the force that's inherently produced in those motor units per se is higher. So this is why, and you said most of I kind of liked it, to be honest. I'm big on the idea of eccentrics being important. When you compare, there's a meta-analysis comparing various studies where you can do concentric only training versus eccentric only training. You see that eccentrics tend to be a little bit better in terms of producing muscle growth. And the idea behind that is they produce more force. So the question that is kind of equivocal, some studies say this, some studies say that in the research, is we've got pretty clear this Henneman size principle on concentrics or isometric contractions. If you just hold, you get the rotation, it'll get harder, the higher threshold motor units come in, you start calling in more and more. And then finally, if you're able to go pretty hard, you're a trained person, you might be able to activate all the motor units that are there, at the very end of a maximal effort isometric contraction. But on the eccentrics, that same orderly process, that same orderly progression from low threshold to high threshold may not quite be exactly the same. So when you lower, you're going to have to turn off some of the type 1s and some of the type 2s. And it's hard to know which ones. The studies are mostly like with hand muscles and this sort of shit, right? Thumb muscles, they can isolate a single motor neuron and see. I haven't seen any studies that occur to me, at least right now, to know whether there's, because they're kind of mixed, whether there's preferential type 2s used on the eccentrics. Some suggest that, and then some suggest that there isn't preferential type 2s or type 1s. So the eccentrics are going to be, when you do, like say it's a max, so you can do a max effort concentric, you like just barely get it up, and then you can do a negative with that thing, you know. And if someone lifted it all the way up for you, you could probably do 4 or 5 negatives on most exercises if you were willing and able. They can take individuals and just do eccentrics, like on a knee extension with machine that will do that, and do 20 max effort eccentrics, all that you can possibly give, and show like 10% fatigue. You would never see that in the gym. You'd have to have someone willing to lift the weight for you every time.
Yeah.
When we would do muscle soreness studies, we'd take like a 1 rep max and do 8 sets of 10 eccentrics only. With the max load they could lift, but you can lower the hell out of that thing.
Yeah.
So, because the energetic cost is so little for those eccentrics. So, the thing that kind of, and this is my idea that has been kind of mentioned but I think this totally fucks up our interpretation of research in a very generalized way, is that let's say, like you kind of suggested, Ken, that eccentrics are better. They're a better stimulus for muscle growth, right? Which would make sense. If you just did eccentrics, you compare eccentrics to concentrics in many studies. They'll put you on a machine where you just do the eccentrics, or you just do concentrics. And they try to equate these in certain ways. It's hard to do it, right? Because it's so easy. If you did the same load on the eccentrics, it's a breeze. If you do 3 sets of 10 with 70% of your 1 rep max, like, you're going to get pretty fatigued after a few sets of that. You do that. You could do that all fucking day on the eccentrics.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, but like there's a good study that my advisor did. Is they compared, if I can remember this, they compared 5 sets of 10 leg press twice a week versus concentric only, versus 5 sets of 10 concentric eccentric, so regular reps twice a week, versus 10 sets of 10 concentric only. And what they found was they got the best muscle growth in the type 1 and type 2 fibers when they did the normal reps, when they included the eccentrics. And even when they doubled the concentric, they weren't able to make up for the growth that didn't occur when they left the eccentrics out. So, but here's the thing. The devil's in the dose, right? So eccentrics are more potent. And you might have some situations where someone does, let's say you do a shitload of hey, more is better, right? So if you do too much of that shit, you get really, really sore, and you may exceed your recovery abilities. So in some of those studies, and Scott and I have talked this on my podcast, you see stuff like some people doing better from 15 sets a week versus 9 sets a week or 6 sets a week, and then some people doing better with 9 sets a week versus 15 sets a week. So for some of those people, 9 sets a week wasn't enough. 15 sets was better. For other people, it's the other way around. Yeah. The same thing could be with eccentrics. Let's just do a bunch of eccentrics. Well, if you do 9 sets of eccentrics, that might be too much. But for other people, because they can recover from it, that might be better. It's a stronger stimulus. But that doesn't mean it's only a better stimulus if you do the right amount of it. Mm-hmm. You do too many sets, and then you just overdid it, and then it's just being stupid, right? So yeah, that's the type 1 and type 2s. There are some studies suggesting that higher reps will kind of preferentially develop the type 1s. You do see there's some studies suggesting the type 2s do get hit more so on the eccentrics, but we're doing concentric and eccentrics for normal reps in the gym. So you're kind of getting both, and you're not probably, especially if you're training hard, you're not probably preferentially you're not just hitting the type 2s, for instance, on the eccentrics. It's both fiber types more than likely. But that might vary by muscle group and also how fast you bring things down, how well you control the eccentrics.
Yeah.
Like there's a meta-analysis too with like rep tempo, and when you do these studies, there's so much variability. It's like there might be an effect for a given individual, but you can't make it out because everyone varies so much. But I think, we can talk about rep tempo and controlling the eccentric. I think it makes sense because you get so much. I'll leave it at this: you get so much bang for your buck. You can do eccentrics when you don't increase fatigue during a set very much at all. Like I said, you can do 20 of those and hardly incur any fatigue to eccentrics only. But you get in the fibers that are active, the tension is much higher. And if you believe that tension is important for muscle growth, I think so. Yep. Then the eccentrics are definitely a winner. So don't neglect them. In fact, sometimes I feel like when I get to the end of a set, and then I'll leave it at this, sometimes I will go a little bit even slower on the eccentric just to make sure I don't injure myself. But I feel like if I try to get reps too fast because the concentrics are more energetically expensive, I'll get fewer reps. I almost rest on the eccentric to some degree. So anyway, that's a ramble.
Andrew Nolan had said, what were these participants average gym goers or advanced bodybuilders who had greater potential for mind-muscle connection and keeping tension in the muscle, etc.? I feel that there would be that would be a variable in bodybuilding versus an average person, which makes sense. I know that my ability to control a negative is completely different now than it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In the studies, like the isokinetic studies, they set the machine up to only go at a certain speed. So you push, and then with the leg press, I know Dudley, he's my mentor. It's all on a tempo too. They'll use like a metronome. So like you just can't drop it down. Like you have to bring it down on tempo. Yeah. So they control the rep. Yeah, it's super important, right? It's a totally different animal if you push up real fast and then just let it drop down and rest for 2 seconds at the bottom versus the guy that does a 3 eccentric. Yeah. Totally different rep. Yeah. Nice. So that's where I think it matters. You can do a free fall and have very little activation until you get to the bottom. Then you have a stretch shortening cycle. And there's some thoughts there. I mean, if people talk about stretch mediated hypertrophy, there's also the possibility it's like, hey, if you have good range of motion and you're someone, if you do have some control and maybe you do a little bit of bouncy bounce at the bottom, and so you'll get a stretch reflex there. You'll have high tensions during partial eccentric that in the lengthened position. If that's more potent, which it probably is, you can get more muscle damage doing exercises or eccentric, especially in a lengthened position. That little bit of a stretchy stretch, which some people try to avoid, that could be more potent, but the mind-muscle connection does matter. If you're just like doing a soup, like the guys, you guys would bounce I used to see guys I haven't seen this in a while. They bounce, they're literally the rib cages or using it as a trampoline. Yeah, it's like what the fuck, man? You're just trying to break your sternum. Yeah. If you're doing that sort of thing, no. But I always, I think that there are people like Ronnie Coleman was the one. When I watch him train, like, oh, he's so sloppy. It's like, yeah, but he's connecting the muscle. He was just he was leveraging the elasticity of the muscle in the stretch shortening cycle, but in a somewhat controlled fashion. And despite how he kind of ended up, like people talk about how crappy his T-bar rowing was in the corner, but he was doing something right. Maybe not that exercise, but he had some sort of a mind-muscle connection because his back certainly seemed to grow. Yeah, and the genetics are there too, so that's the other confounding factor. But
we saw that picture, that video of Hani, or was it who was it? Hadi, remember that, Skip?
Hadi.
Yes, I remember that.
Doing those T-bar rows, and it's like, holy crap, man! I feel like I might hit my traps with that at best,
Yeah.
And he has no reason to change it because clearly it's working. I mean, that's the thing. If I were him, I would continue to do what I'm doing too. It's just that it's not applicable for the vast majority of the rest of us because it's. You just look at that and you're like, that's egregious. That just does not. Yeah. Should not. He should not even video that and put that out.
But then you see his back and it's like, I can't say anything.
Exactly. And Jay Cutler. I mean, I'm not. I don't want to start picking people apart. We're talking about top bodybuilders. The best bodybuilders on the planet. But there is an argument there, really, and this is another rabbit hole. That we don't have time for, but. Sometimes we really do have to step back, and there's efficient training and there's good mechanics and everything else, and based on injury prevention and safety. And I just really do think that there is a genetically gifted part of this sport or our society that I don't want to say can do whatever they want, but they're just not put together like the rest of us. They're, it's the Cal Ripkens of bodybuilding. They can just go and go and go, and they're made of rubber, and they don't have the injuries. I mean, what were Jay's injuries? Did he have any major
bicep
injury? I know he was smart in the sense that he didn't train to the strength level that he had. What was it, bicep?
That was at the end,
he had a bicep tear.
Yeah. Okay.
But
I wonder if some of the curls I saw were before. What's that?
It worked. It looked so good that he asked the surgeon if he could purposely cut the other one for him. It's actually funny because I had a buddy, and I told you guys this because we talked about it last episode about how Skip has had several clients who went bowling and partially tore their biceps, right? Yeah. And one of my good buddies messaged me the other day, and he was like, "Hey, when you tore your bicep, which was several years ago, doing a bicep curl, and when I say tear, I'm not talking about tearing the tendon. I'm talking about tearing the muscle from the tendons. So the tendon's completely intact." And I think that's kind of what the tears that your clients probably had, Skip, similar, I would imagine. And it's also the same kind of tear that my buddy Scott had. And I was giving him all the rundowns, and I'm like, you go, once it's healed, go do a front double and tell me that bicep doesn't look better, because it just creates that little divot in the where the muscle attaches at the elbow, and it makes your peak look just a little bit better.
Yeah. As far as being sloppy, if someone could maintain, this is, I've said this time and time again. So we're weaker on let's say you want to train heavy. We're weaker on the concentric. We're strong on the eccentric. Let's say you've got someone who can control the eccentric. Throwing some body English in there makes sense if we know about the force velocity curve of skeletal muscle, that it's weaker on the concentric than on the eccentric. So maintain activation of the active muscle, the trained muscle, the targeted muscle. Use the accessory muscles to help on the way up, to be a little bit sloppy. This is like a skill, right? This is an athletic skill, I think. And then control the eccentric, because you're stronger, so you can control a heavier load than you could probably lift with the same kind of control, so to speak. Because you're, depending on the speed, you're 20-30% stronger on an eccentric than on a concentric. So not that I'm saying everyone should go out and just train like an asshole and just start throwing shit all over the place, but there's something to say. And there was a line of Life Fitness had a line of machines that would add 20% to the eccentric. I loved them. It was a magnetically driven set of machines. Okay, that's a way that would increase the activation on those eccentrics without substantially increasing fatigue, because you're simply stronger. That's an ideal way if we could set up the ultimate space age, and this is why the study I mentioned from that my advisor Dudley was involved with, that was for NASA. They were looking at what's necessary to maintain muscle in space. So this is like space age training would stimulate the muscle. The reps would be set up so that they're easier on the concentric and harder on the eccentric. And I've got one out in my barn right now. It's electronically driven device, magnetically driven device, and that's one of the modes, eccentric. You set the eccentric force, and it gives you 20% less on the concentric. And that, theoretically, that would be, I'd like to see people start doing studies with those things, because but they got to find the right dose. So that's each of those reps, each of those sets are more potent. So if you compare 10 with 10 of the overloaded eccentrics might be more. But I think that's one reason why sloppy reps make sense to me, as long as they're not, too risky in terms of an injury. Yeah. And the other thing, that I think, not for everybody, there's plenty of examples of guys who train really hard with just laser-like focus. But when you just go in there and you're just ready to roar and rip that shit, and you're just there's nothing going to stop you. You're a fucking force of nature, and that weight's going to move no matter fucking what. You get after it. And that mindset is one that sometimes it's okay to get a little bit sloppy with things here and there, now and again. And on the other side of the coin, it's like, well, all my reps need to be perfect and, with the right pinky twist, as Dante might have said, and that kind of stuff. And that doesn't lend itself well to making progress, I think, to being overly analytical. Especially when I think, and Scott, I'm going to do another podcast on progressive overload. We talked about that. I think I bet on mine. Another one, someone invited me on that topic, but that's that's the most scientific principle there is.
Yeah.
That's in every single study they do progressive overload, regardless of what they're testing, concentric versus eccentric, stretch position, rep tempo, this exercise versus that. Progressive overload is the underlying principle that's always there. And how many people do you see boastfully showing their logbooks on Instagram? I haven't seen a logbook on Instagram, and I think James Hollingshead was selling some for a while, and it was probably a total flop, right? Because people don't like to log their shit.
We have a logbook available from Think Big if you go to the merchandise page.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So anyway, that's my thought on like being sloppy, but you got to have the mind muscle connection. I mean, I don't want to pick on him, but like if you guys know who Sam Sulek is now for sure. He was,
can you tell us who he is?
Oh, yeah, no, I forgot.
I'm totally kidding.
We don't know.
Yeah, we talked about him a bit. Like,
in a respectful way, we're grown adult males, and we don't thrive on this younger YouTube crowd, maybe like we would have if we were in that age group. So we knew of him, and we were talking very respectfully, and we're like, hey, we totally get what he's doing. Like, if it's working, why change it? And then a lot of the comments were like, oh, you guys pretending like you don't know who the biggest fitness superstar in the world is. And it's like, well, no, we mentioned that we knew of him, but we don't watch every new drop video that comes out,
Right. Yeah. So like the way he does squats, I think is badass. Feet close together. He doesn't do them wide out necessarily like Platts does, but he goes all the way down. He's strong as shit. Full range of motion, very quad dominant. But there are a lot of exercises he does where, and this is just an intuitive thing from having trained for a couple of weeks, something like that now over the last 4 decades. He's just like, oh, he's missing so much shit. He's missing stuff there. He's missing some important things. He's got the right mindset. He's trying to move heavy shit around. And in some exercise, he's dead on. Whereas you look at I trained with Dave Henry. Like Dave that was one thing about training with Dave. It's like, he's just fucking it was just like this piston-like beauty, aesthetic, precision to each of his repetitions. Mm-hmm. And you could tell he's hitting the target muscle each time. And he was just naturally strong. So he didn't have like an ego that, so I got to use more weight because he's already using more weight than anyone else in the gym in most every occasion. So some people you can see, and then you look at Ronnie, like I mentioned before, and even though he was kind of sloppy, he looked like, to me, I always had the sense he had a really good mind-muscle connection. I
agree.
Very even on somebody did bicep curls and they looked really kind of crappy, but they look like not that he really needed more biceps, but that was maybe his worst one. But I see some on Sam, so you can pick that out. That what I'm talking about here is throwing some body English, and there's a way to do that where you maintain the mind-muscle connection, and then there's a way to just kind of train sloppy. That's just sloppy training, and you're missing the target muscle, and you're leaving range of motion, in the tank where it could be had, which could probably help with the growth stimulus.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think there's any way to really explain that, do you? It's almost one of those things. The difference is just kind of an experience thing.
You could get all fancy with EMGs and you could digitize it biomechanically, and you could probably see it. You could figure out what the differences are. For sure, by filming somebody and the EMG, you could look at the activation patterns of the muscle.
We may be able to synchronize. But I guess what I'm saying is the average person, and I think that's where this type of conversation, and I think it's a good conversation, isn't terribly beneficial for the newbie, only because they're not going to understand what is good and what isn't from a mechanic standpoint of being loose. It just almost, maybe I'm not doing it very successfully, but maybe I just put myself in that newbie position going, oh, well, he's saying I can be loose and if it feels good. It's just not that simple. It's almost like a coordinated or a coordination issue of knowing when that momentum is beneficial and not going to injure you. Because if you get sloppy at the wrong time, you use a bicep curl as an example. If you start to get sloppy at the wrong time, that will open you up to a different, or potentially to injury, versus when you get sloppy, that it can help you when you have that mind-muscle connection to keep that set going and not be in a vulnerable position. I guess the best way to explain it is this. You can drop dumbbells the wrong way, or you can drop dumbbells the right way. But it's not necessarily wrong to drop dumbbells if you know how to drop them so they don't fucking break and they go where they're supposed to go.
Yeah.
Scott said 4 decades of experience. That's where, You know, it just takes time. It takes time. Yeah. Let me ask you guys this. How long do you think it takes on average to get that good mind-muscle connection to really start to appreciate the topic we're talking about right here?
So variable. Like, because I know some people that train for 6 months and they just get it. And then I know some people, and actually I'll even go a step further. I think it's intra-exercise variability. Like, some people just have better coordination in planar movements. Yeah. Some people have better coordination in other, what do you call it? What's the other plane that's escaping my brain? You guys get what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely.
Some people might do really good in like a squat, hack squat, deadlifts, like just that kind of coordinated movement. Whereas things coming from their arms and their chest, like they don't have that coordination, that neuromuscular coordination. So that's the first step before they even get the rep speed, the body English that we're talking about added in. I just think it's one of those things where you know it looks good when you see it, because then you just go like, oh, that guy knows what he's doing. Right. And then you know when it doesn't look good. And you're like, man, if that guy would clean his reps up a little bit, he'd be getting more out of his efforts. That kind of
There's
thing.
plenty of people who train for a long time who have no concept. They might even think they do. And you can just look and go, you just don't. Or even where that mind-muscle connection is there for the more obvious, less complex muscles. But I still stand on this, and I will stand on this probably till I go in the ground. The vast majority of people do not understand the proper mechanics of training back, because it's such a complicated musculature that even people who have been around a long time and have good physiques do not understand and do not train their back correctly. I'd say, I mean, it's an arbitrary number to make my point, but 70% of the people in most gyms just aren't, if not more than that.
I would agree.
No. And they don't understand. And I understand everybody's doing their one-arm lat pull and everything else. That's actually, in my opinion, a step in the right direction. Because as annoying as that was to see every kid, I mean, I'm sounding like the guys who are against Sam now, or the Sam wannabes. But it was irritating to go in there because they're going to be on that machine for 20 minutes doing these ridiculous slow one-arm movements. Exactly. And I'm waiting to use that piece. So it's selfish in that sense. But it did get a lot of those people, and especially that younger generation or the newbie type trainer, to really focus and think more complex, or think about the complexities of the musculature of the back and try to hone in on those specific places. Where before it's just like, well, do a lat pull, do a chin, do a row as shitty as possible. It looks good in the mirror.
What gets missed there sometimes then, and this was Ben Pokulski was one of the first people to kind of usher that idea into the industry. And I talked to Ben on the phone one time, and like his plan was like that's stage one for people, is to learn mind-muscle connection with these sort of isolation movements, et cetera, et cetera. And once they've got that down for a couple years or so, then really start moving towards progressive overload with a good mind-muscle connection. He said, but all that early stuff, it just took off so well that he just never left. He never really went to phase two, because he was just doing so well financially, business-wise, that he never really transitioned to that. But the thing I was going to say, because Ken, you're saying like a lot of people won't kind of get what we're saying, is like one thing I've done when I teach seminars, when I work with people, is like, let's say it's a bicep curl. And I do this. You can also do this when just for your training, if you're doing progressive overload, is you do a set of perfect form, right? And where, like, let's say it's a bicep curl, and your biceps, okay, there's nothing left there. And as long as you're safe with this, right, then say, now I'm going to try to throw a little bit of body English in and practice that. And you've got fatigue, you've got the biofeedback coming from the muscle that you've just destroyed, and you're staying just as focused as you were on those previous reps during these extra body English reps. And then they get a feel for what that can be. And you can do that. You could do that with like a dumbbell row, wouldn't be a bad one if they're well supported, doing perfect form, and then see what happens when they put a little bit of twist into it. But only after they've really fatigued, and the reps they would write down their logbook would be 12. And then they add 3 cheat reps, so to speak. I got an exercise that I came up with a couple that I keep on reading. I posted a video on Instagram. It's a row stop dead for back.
Yes.
And Scott knows these. He's done these. And
they're brutal, man. They're brutal.
They're awesome. And all it is instead of it's a playoff dead stop row, but you bend over in a you can use a barbell or a split machine, You could even do it with dumbbells, I guess, but usually works better with the bar. And you do a row up to the row, you stop, you hold the bar there, and then you stand upright as if you were doing a deadlift, but you got the bar held right at your belt line. And then you go back down, and then you reverse the movement. So you're holding that bar pushed up against right at your umbilicus or so. And then you stand up with it. So you row, you stop, you deadlift it up, then you reverse it, and then row it back down. They're fucking brutal. They're awesome. What's that?
I was gonna say it's probably a really safe way to do a deadlift too. Like if you're someone that can't do traditional deadlifts anymore, because the bar is as close to your core, to your center of gravity, as it's ever going to be when it's tucked in your umbilicus. So that's the first thing I thought of.
And then when you go and do rows or anything else, it's like, wow, these don't hit my lats for shit compared to this one.
I got the video, Scott. I got the video.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. We look now. Yeah. So I'm behind there. I'm behind. Look he's got no weight on there, right?
Yeah. We were smoked. So this is the end of the workout.
Yep.
I thought that was when you guys first started.
Yeah. I was smoked,
but still,
man.
You're not using much weight on these.
My lower back was screaming at me doing these.
Yeah, I can see you won't need a lot of weight for these.
And I would rather have. See, you can't even hold the bar up there. So he was so fatigued.
Oh wait, that's Scott. At first, I admit, I'm like, oh shit, that's Scott. It's the lack of the beard.
Oh yeah,
Did you have weight for the female?
I don't recognize him without the beard now.
That's funny, man, because you knew me for years without it, but
I know exactly. Yeah.
Well, listen, we got to wrap this thing up. Yeah. We got to wrap this thing up, though. Scott, we appreciate you coming in to hang out with us, man. We should have you back more often.
That's cool.
We'd love to. All right, guys, go to byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there. Also, Amazon, get the hardcover. And, of course, go to bodyberry.com to reach out to Andrew for coaching, teamskip.com. Reach out to Skip, mcnallydiets@gmail.com. You can hit me up for coaching. And, of course, truenutrition.com. Use our code THINK, supplementsource.ca. And thank you to all of our Patreons. You guys are freaking awesome. And to everybody in the live stream, we're going to record another episode. So, all right. We appreciate you guys. Thank you, Scott.
Adios.